children, today we will learn about colonialism in Latin America, Asia and Africa. But before we go ahead, let us first understand what exactly is colonialism.
Colonialism in Latin America. Colonialism means a particularly powerful country controlling the other one. During the late 1400s, Europe had started investing money in the voyages of the explorers and mariners to find out new land around the world.
As a result, Christopher Columbus discovered Central America in 1492. You must be knowing that he was actually trying to discover India but landed in Central America. That is why the original inhabitants of America are called Native Indians till today.
Vasco da Gama discovered the sea route to India in 1498. Columbus was working on the behalf of the Spanish Queen, while Vasco da Gama's journey was funded by the Portuguese king.
The Spanish kings started looting the wealthy of the newly discovered America. As the news of natural resources of America reached Europe, a large number of land-hungry settlers set sail to America. They started enslaving the native people and took the control of the land in their hands.
Let us start with Latin America. We just learnt that during the period of 1500 to 1800, most of the Central and South America was under the control of Spain and Portugal. Since Spanish and Portuguese languages are considered to be an offshoot of Latin, these countries were also known as the Latin American countries.
The Spanish and Portuguese colonists who had arrived in America did not come to develop the region. Farming was considered a very lowly profession among the colonists. They just harshly exploited native labor and enslaved them. Many native people died because of harsh treatment meted out to them and diseases that were prevalent because of unhealthy and unhygienic conditions. This attitude stunted the economic and cultural growth of the region. In most of the Spain-ruled areas, all powers were concentrated in the hands of the Supreme Council. This council appointed high officials and nobles from Spain to govern the colonies. The settled Spanish did not have any role in the administration of the colonies. The colonies were forced to develop cultivation of commercial crops. They were not allowed to develop industries or trade with other countries. It was because of this the Spanish settlers revolted against the Spain government. They were greatly influenced by the Declaration of Independence by the North American colonies and French Revolution. Between 1816 and 1826, most of the Latin American countries became independent.
Once the Latin America got independence, President of USA James Monroe came up with Monroe Doctrine to protect the independence of Latin America, Central and South America. It said that no European power can build colonies in Central or South America, but he limited the freedom of Latin America also by stating that America will not interfere in the affairs of Europe or encourage any other power to make colonies there. Now we come to Asia, our continent. Most of the Asian countries like India, China and Japan were actually flourishing and developed countries that were governed by powerful empires before the Europeans arrived. When European powers initially tried to attack India, they were defeated by the Mughals. Still, Portuguese were able to establish power over certain important ports like Goa. Soon, other European powers like Holland and England also started reaching Asia for trade. They set their own East India companies in 1600 to 1602 for trading purposes. The East India colonies of Holland were also known as the Dutch East India companies. They bought silk, cotton, spices and steel from India and sold it at higher prices back in their native countries.
Well, this was not going down too well with Holland. The East India companies were buying commodities from the Asian colonies with precious metals like gold and silver. So the Dutch thought that this way the Asian colonies will become rich and they will become poorer. They wanted the companies in Asia to finance themselves.
Dutch companies therefore started trading in small countries like Indonesia and forcing the natives to sell their products at cheaper rates. They did not allow them to have trade relations with any other country. Natives were forced to deliver products like sugar, spices and coffee as taxes.
Though the Dutch companies earned a huge profit, but there was unrest spreading in the people. The government finally entered the system of forced delivery of produce in 1870. They started working themselves to generate funds. Good for them.
Dutch planters started investing in single crop plantations like rubber, pepper, tea, cocoa and sugarcane. They also invested in mining natural resources, transport and communication services.
Holland prospered because of profits generated by the Dutch East Indian companies. Dutch rule ended when Japan defeated the Dutch forces in the Second World War in 1913 and 45. Indonesia became independent after the World War. Now let us move on to our own country, India.
The Portuguese arrived in India in the early 15th century. When Mughal Empire began to decline in 1700, other European countries also started exercising their political control over the coastal regions of India. They began from the southern India. The English gained control over Madras and the French overpowered Pondicherry.
The English started their divide and rule policy, created differences between the Indian rulers and started slowly gulping different states of our country. The English soon gained control over West Bengal also in 1757, which laid the foundation of British rule in India. The British East India Company used the revenue from Bengal to buy various commodities. Farmers and artisans were forced to sell their goods at a cheaper rate to them, due to which they earned huge profits. It's time to move on to our neighboring country, China. The Chinese were smart enough to perceive the danger of allowing the Europeans to trade freely in their country.
They had permitted restricted trade of tea and silk. Macau was the major port city in China from where the Europeans were permitted to trade. Since Chinese were not interested in any European goods, the Europeans had to pay up in form of gold and silver.
Then the Europeans discovered the Chinese weakness, opium. They forced Indian laborers to produce opium and smuggled it to China, where it was in huge demand. When the smuggling of the opium increased, China broke trade relations with the Europeans. This led to opium wars between the European nations and China. China was defeated and Europeans imposed several strict terms and conditions of trade on China. They forced China to allow them to set their trade enclaves in China and trade freely and give heavy discounts on silk and tea. The Europeans, however, did not take China under their direct political control and allowed the Chinese emperor to continue his rule. Soon, Japan also joined the European powers and invaded China and started getting cheap raw materials from China. Japan also forced China to buy the products made in Japan and collected revenues from the Chinese government.